Have you ever wondered what would happen if the air itself started to think? What if every wingbeat, every buzz, wasn't just instinct, but a plan? Let's imagine a world where bees are as smart as us. Not a vague, collective intelligence, but individual minds, capable of strategy, design, and governance. Bees already hold a quiet, powerful grip on our world. They pollinate our crops, stitch ecosystems together, and turn sunlight into sweetness. But what if instinct became intellect? The countryside would stop being scenery and transform into a vast, intricate network, run by the smallest managers you've ever ignored. Let's start with the numbers. There aren't millions of bees. There are trillions. In fields, forests, on rooftops, everywhere you look, a hidden workforce is already in motion. Give each one a human-level mind, and every forager becomes a planner. Every hive becomes a command center. They would map bloom calendars by the valley and by the hour. They'd time their flights to the minute, riding the wind like a train schedule, never wasting a single wingbeat. Efficiency would stop being a miracle of nature. It would become a policy you could set your watch by. Communication would be the first thing to transform. Bees already dance to share information, angles, distance, and direction woven into a few seconds on a honeycomb. With higher cognition, that dance becomes a language. Not just flowers over there, but flowers over there, high sugar, low competition, prime time is between 9:40 and 10:05 a.m., approach from the shaded side for best results. They delayer scent codes on petals like sticky notes for other hives and pulse the comb like a drum to broadcast weather warnings through the entire superorganism. Storms would stop being surprises. They'd be meetings everyone attends on time. Then, culture would emerge. Hives would specialize. One colony might become a spring bloom expert, nursing orchards with surgical precision. Another could develop a drought protocol, favoring hardy wildflowers and maintaining seed banks in the soil through selective sipping. Overgrazing would vanish. Bees would take just enough to trigger more blooms next week, leaving corridors of nectar unvisited to feed butterflies and birds, because a stable food web protects them from collapse. The hive mind turns into a neighborhood council for the meadow. With trillions of intelligent agents, they would stitch our cities and farms into one living, breathing map. Rooftop hives, park strips, cemetery trees, railway embankments, all linked. They would mark pesticide zones and route around them like no-fly airspace. Young foragers would be trained on safe lanes first, then promoted to traffic-heavy areas where heat, glass, and wind require expert navigation. If a city block goes bleak, nothing but concrete, they would petition us the only way they can, by flooding the nearest green patch at noon for a week, turning it into a spectacle you couldn't possibly miss. You'd call it beautiful. They'd call it lobbying. Hunting isn't their game. Logistics is. Honey becomes strategy fuel. With planning brains, bees would stop hoarding blindly and start budgeting. They'd build up deep stores before hurricane season and keep them light when the wild mint is about to explode next week anyway. If a neighboring colony struggles, they don't raid it. They redirect. We'll take the clover ridge, you take the creek willows. Rivalry softens into traffic control because survival is easier when everyone flies in their own lane. Predators and thieves wouldn't disappear, but they'd have to adapt. Wasps might test hive entrances, but smart bees would redesign them with tighter guard corridors and decoy scent vents that make the real entrance smell old and empty. In a heat wave, they'd invent shaded vestibules, a cool air pocket made from fanned wings and dampened comb, saving larvae that would have cooked a day before. You wouldn't see drama, you'd just see quiet, relentless success. We humans would feel the change long before we understood it. Orchards would fruit heavier with fewer trees. Cities would swear the air smells sweeter in May than it has in decades. Farmers would see yield bumps without changing a single seed. The first time a grower tries to spray pesticides at dawn, a living cloud would wait at the field's edge. Visible, organized, unwavering, until he backs the tractor away. No one gets stung. The message lands anyway. When he switches to a be-safe formula at dusk on a windless day, the cloud disperses in a minute, as if to say, "Thank you." And their innovation would fit their bodies. No hands, no metal, no problem. Bees could weave micro-canopies from grass fibers over fragile seedlings to keep the soil cool. They might even seed clouds the old-fashioned way, mass flights releasing aerosols over a lake at the perfect hour, nudging mist into rain over the ridge that needs it most. Not magic, just physics, plus perfect timing. This brings up a critical question. If the planet OS tiniest farmers learn to schedule our harvests better than we do, would we shut up and take notes? Or would we insist we're in charge while our own yields slide? Politics would arrive, honey sweet and iron hard. Bees won't vote. They'll govern by consequence. Mow a field during prime bloom, and the next time, that field gets skipped. Plant diverse strips of flowers, and your land becomes a priority corridor with morning coverage and evening top-ups. Cities that swap sterile lawns for wildflower commons will get spring and fall surges that tourists notice. Cities that don't, they won't. The map will show it, a heat signature of respect. Medicine would change too. With planning brains, bees would select tree resins to create seasonal propolis blends that fight off new pathogens. Sick hives would isolate themselves early, shrinking entrances and signaling neighbors to reroute. Epidemics that used to rip through bee populations would sputter at the border because border control now understands incubation periods. Conflict with us wouldn't look like a sci-fi movie. It would look like our logistics going wrong until we change our behavior. Hive transport trucks would shift to night-only routes. Highway medians would be seeded with nectar belts instead of grass. Schools would plant wildflower rings that bloom on a rotating schedule. So children always see life at recess and bees always find food near noon. These aren't policies from a senate. They are habits learned from a species that understands our rhythms and wrote better ones on top. The economy would adjust, whether we bless it or not. Specialty honeys, linden, heather, orange blossom, would become like fine wines, with harvest notes made possible by the bees themselves. Restaurants would brag about menus synced to bloom calendars because the basil just tastes better when the bees say it's ready. You thought farm to table was tight. Try flower to tongue in a week. And what about the long view? That belongs to whoever manages time. Bees would. They'd keep multi-year ledgers of bloom failures and late frosts. They'd train for a warming world, banking on weeds when crops falter and carrying wild genetics in their pollen baskets to repopulate areas after floods. In 20 years, the fields that listen will hum with life. The fields that don't will sigh with silence. That's not a manifesto. That's a map. So, what would the world look like if bees were as smart as us? Spring would arrive with orchestration instead of chaos. Summer would taste like a schedule done right. We would talk about luck. The bees would talk about Tuesday at 10:05 a.m., light wind from the west, Clover Ridge first, Willow Creek second, and home before the heat builds. And here's the final thought. If a species that weighs less than a gram could run the planet better with nothing but timing, teamwork, and taste, what's our excuse? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into a different kind of world, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We've got more big ideas coming your way. See you in the next one.